Welcome to Before the Bounce. It's episode 15 and it's entirely dedicated to mental health awareness. A really powerful topic at the moment, and we got three guests with really powerful stories to tell. TV personality Mark Aiston, as well as ex-Norwood footballer Luke McLean, and Star Force survivor as well, Derek McManus as well. So it's going to be all discussing about their battles, and they've all got really powerful stories to tell. So stay tuned. It's going to be really compelling, and it's all here at Before the Bounce.
Yeah, sitting here with the great Mark Aiston, having a chat about his journey. He's just been on absolutely fantastic, well, I don't know if fantastic's the right word, but media personality. Now, mate, I reckon we're talking about your addictions. Can you remember the point where you got to where you said, enough's enough?
Yeah, I can actually, Phil. It was about 4 months ago when my sister, Kathy, and my best mate, Brad, rang me and said, why don't we go out for tea? And we went down to Glenelg and they eyeballed me and said, we're really worried about you. We feel as though this is getting out of control and we'd like to look at all options. And within 2 days I was in rehab in Melbourne. So I'll never forget that night. I didn't have a drink that night, which killed me. Didn't do anything else either. Actually, I might have when I got home. And yeah, that was the tipping point, and it was a very, very important and a very emotional night.
But I don't want to take you back into the dark cave, but when you talk about addictions, what are we talking about?
Talking about marijuana, well, when I was 14, I started smoking dope, started drinking and gambling, and did all of them in excess.
Yes.
Because that's my nature. And then 3 years ago, I started using cocaine. So it's a fair combination. Never tried ice and never tried heroin, but it was those four. I mean, three of them are substances, obviously, and one of them's an addiction that's slightly different, the gambling, but it still does as much damage. But when you combine all four, and when you do all of them, Phil, at a high level, it doesn't. I don't think it matters who you are. You're going to end up where I ended up, which is basically in hell and not too far away from being dead.
I want to get on to the really good stuff, but just before I do you reckon you were heading towards ice and heroin? Was that the next step, or once you got those four, you think, I've got enough?
I've got enough, yeah, I didn't have any room.
Were you tempted?
No, look, I wasn't, but I can't say to you categorically that I wouldn't have, depending on the circumstances. I certainly wouldn't have gone out and looked for those drugs. But I had a very dear friend of mine who passed away 10 years ago who used to use heroin in the 70s. And I'd watch him use it and watch what it did to him. And maybe that was just a memory, too hard to duplicate. So thankfully I didn't. I mean, those others did enough damage, but thankfully I didn't go to that next level.
All right, so we'll go back to the conversation you had with your sister, and 2 days later you've checked yourself into Melbourne, so well done in being big enough to recognise that.
Yeah.
Then you were very open about that time in there. You were regularly posting how it was in the rehab centre.
Yep.
Is that the right term? We call it a rehab
centre?
And some people would look at that and say, oh, Mark Aiston, TV personality, it's all about the act.
Yeah.
For you, was it absolutely nothing to do with that? It was, I'm sharing this journey, so perhaps this opens the door for other people. What were the reasons for sharing it so openly?
Well, I went public sort of indirectly, I guess, 3 years ago after I lost my job at Channel 10, because I started a show called The Mental Health Show, and I was interviewed by a journalist at The Advertiser. So he said, do you want to talk about the show? And I said, yes. He said, do you want to talk about your issues as well? And I thought to myself, well, if I don't, that's pretty hypocritical, because my mental health show is all about making people more aware of the issues and also talking more about it. So I'd already gone public, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to continue with the message because I genuinely want to help other people. Of course, I'd like to work in the future. That's not my main goal at the moment. Of course, I mean, I've got to earn money, I've got to pay rent, and I've got to buy stuff, all that sort of stuff. But my main reason, and it is still my main reason, is to help other people. And from a selfish point of view too, Phil, it's to help me, because it's a very cathartic experience. Very cathartic.
I'll have to go and look that word up when we finish, mate.
What, the experience?
No, cathartic, yeah. I'm not sure what you're doing. Anyway, hey, for Mark Aiston now,
Excuse me.
Where to now? I mean, you've touched on, eventually I have to get back and get a job. I have to get that, but there has to be, I imagine, some structure in your life that you've learnt through your 3 or 4 month journey.
Yeah.
That you've got to try and stay within that structure so you don't turn to the left instead of to the right or straight ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at the moment, and I've only been out of rehab now for about 6 weeks, Phil, fundamentally, most of my day is filled with stuff that is to do with me. Getting well, taking the dog for a walk twice a day, going to the gym twice a day, going to AA or NA meetings, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, keeping my journal, doing my meditation, and doing a few other bits and pieces. Underlying all of that, not underpinning, but underlying all of that, I'm looking around, but I'm also getting opportunities that are coming my way, which is something that happens when you are clean and sober. It's quite extraordinary how things come to you when you're not desperately looking. So I guess the short answer is I'm looking after myself at the moment with the intent of eventually getting back into work, not full time, but getting back into some sort of work now, whether that's with the Hayter Clinic, for example, which is where I stayed over in Melbourne, whether that's doing a little radio, whether that's doing a little more with my media training business, who knows. But right at the moment, my main focus is on me, because if I don't keep well, then it really is irrelevant what I'm thinking about doing job-wise, because that just won't happen.
All right, Mark Aiston, our special guest, mate. Keep well.
Is that it?
That's it. Because
that was quick.
Well, that was well, I know you and I could talk for a while. I know you'd have a couple of good jokes, but
we probably will after the cameras are off.
Well, and there'll be some good stories told there with the cameras off, I can assure you, mate. I know you're having a chat with a couple of other fellas later on up at the bar, mate. So,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, you're trying to kick a habit and they've got you up at the bar, so that makes sense to me
Perfect.
somehow.
Yeah.
I know we're supposed to wrap it up, but I do want to ask you this question, because I did watch with interest your journey that you were posting.
Yeah.
Now you're still talking about it with your dog in the back seat.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering, is that against the law to be filming yourself while you're driving with the dog in the back seat?
You know,
Has the dog got a seatbelt on?
Yes, he has.
Yeah, okay.
But you know what the bigger issue is? A lot of people have been saying, "Oh, I love your post, but you shouldn't be driving and videoing yourself." But my argument is, I'm not starting and stopping it while I'm driving, and it's just the same as, I don't know why we're talking about this.
Are you stopping and starting the car, or you just keep going once you're on the... Because that may be the reason they're asking.
Stopping and starting the video, but I'm only using it as a phone.
Right.
The only difference is I'm on camera rather than on the phone. Detective Smyth.
No, good mental health. Mark Aiston, our guest. Yeah, so I'm sitting here with Luke McLean, Greg Anderson. We're going to get into Luke about, well, we're not going to get into it too much.
Get into me.
Going to talk to you.
Okay.
I Am Worth More Foundation. Just take us through, it's been going for just over a year now.
Yep.
I Am Worth More Foundation, Luke.
Yeah, it has. So I guess started on the back of my own personal experiences, but I'm Worth More really is a way of being able to encourage everyone that they do have value and that they are worth more than sometimes how we feel when we are at our lowest points. But yeah, it's a lived experience program that shares lived experience throughout our programs and throughout our sessions, and encourages everyone to understand that this mental health is something that we all have, and it's something that we all can focus on, prioritise, and look to be able to install into our daily lives. So,
because I mean, like when you look at yourself, I mean, you played for Norda Footy Club,
Yep.
you know, strong, good-looking bloke, and you'd never thought that was ever going to be an issue in your life.
Oh, absolutely. I think particularly when I was back at Nord, because I always had the dream to play AFL.
Yeah, of
so
course.
I had a very purpose-driven life. It was, very regimented in, the training that I was doing, but it was all for my physical health.
Yeah.
As soon as I didn't realise that dream of playing AFL,
okay, yeah.
I kind of lost purpose, I lost meaning, and therefore I started to fall into a lot of unproductive behaviours and patterns that I guess contributed to my dark times as well. So it kind of started that way, but then it uncovered a lot of other areas that became very unproductive.
So just life pressures that you put on yourself, really, and expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was underlying factors that I've, through professional help, been able to understand, and a lot of those behavioural patterns and the mental illness were not necessarily from not being drafted, but I definitely did have a lot of pressure on myself,
Yeah.
but even just thinking about not getting drafted, for me, because that was my goal, it was almost, I was convincing myself then that I can't achieve what I want to achieve. So it was almost that self-value took a massive hit.
And a spiral just started. Yeah, and how bad was the spiral?
Oh, it was, the bad times were extremely bad. I mean, I call it rock bottom, and most people may have had a rock bottom, but I just kept happening. They kept happening, and they kept getting worse and worse. So the spiral was pretty, well, it was very, very repetitive, and that cycle just kept getting deeper and deeper.
Hey, Luke, with the knowledge you've got now, is there a point you can go back to when you go, I should have sought help when I got to this stage? I mean, we tend to, as blokes, go, they talk about getting prostate cancer, and most blokes say, I don't really want to do that. So mental health is kind of like, oh, wow, I don't really want to admit to that. But it's starting to become, we're a bit more aware of it. Still don't want to quite touch it.
Yep.
But if you had to give some advice to someone right now, with your experience that you've had, at what point do you say, go and get help now?
I think the point of getting help and just understanding that there's a difference between mental health and mental illness is massive. I think being able to understand that people can have mental illness and still be mentally healthy, but people cannot have mental illness and be mentally unhealthy if they're not focusing on their mental health. My advice to anyone is just understand what makes up mental health and our well-being, and make it a priority just as much as you would your work, your physical health, your relationships, your finances. Make it a priority. So for me, look, I can go back and pinpoint certain areas where I could have put my hand up, but because the way that a lot of men in particular are brought up is to not show emotion. As soon as you start crying, it's, oh, don't do that, you'll be all right. You can't show any weakness. So for a lot of men, we're just ingrained to just toughen it up, princess, basically.
Yep.
So we then get into that method of, I can fix myself. So I didn't want to ask for help because I was too ashamed and embarrassed to do it.
Do you find that more men nowadays are putting their hand up though? I mean, you look at Boyd from the Bulldogs. I'm sorry, I'm picking out big names in our community, I suppose. And you look at Matthew Broadbent as well. And I think there's two or three that they're putting their hand and say, well, I do need some help. I need to step away. Are we finding that the percentage is growing? That I need to put my hand up.
Yeah,
whereas,
definitely.
we're probably looking at 15 years ago, no one's putting their hand up.
Yeah. I think definitely, and I think that comes from the constant conversations and the more awareness around it. And I think that sets a great example.
And your foundation as well. That's fantastic. Somewhere to, I need help.
Yeah, thanks. I think from an AFL player's perspective, there's a lot of pressure in order to do that, and I think it's extremely brave for them to be able to do it, and it does set a great example for young people that may be struggling to be able to put their hand up and ask for help as well. Because unless you ask for help, you can't improve. Anything.
And you spiral rock bottom over
Absolutely.
and over.
Hey, Luke, just quickly, because we have to go, mate, and we could talk forever about this.
Yeah.
I want to get some help. I want to get in touch with you and your foundation. Best way to go about that?
So you can go via our website, which is iamworthmore.today. A lot of people ask about why is it today. Number one, it was cheap to get it started. But secondly, it is just focusing on the present. We can't change the past and we can't predict the future. So it's just focusing on today and what we can control today.
Luke McLean, our special guest. If you're feeling any kind, what's the right word, mate?
I
it's
think
not mental illness. If you're feeling stressed, what's the
Stressed, is it, or
it's just if you want to work on your mental health, which everyone should be daily.
doing.
Every single person should be.
All right, Luke McLean is the guy that you need to look up and have a chat with. Stay with us.
Thank you.
Yes, we're sitting here with Derek McManus. We're going to get to his business in a minute. But for those that don't remember, 1994 in the Barossa, shot 14 times with a semi-automatic rifle, lying on the ground, bleeding to death. Maybe time to die, but didn't want to leave us just yet. He joins us now. Derek, how are you, mate?
Very good today.
Very good today, mate. Now, you've got a business going up and running at the moment, mate. You're out speaking to a lot of people. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, so I talk. The hook for everybody is they want to hear about the shooting, which is all very, very interesting, but I do get down to talking about peak performance, high performance. The basis of the business is called human durability, and that's about going beyond resilience to sustaining optimal performance, which is essentially what everybody wants to do. Nobody wants to be sitting around waiting for things to happen and then have to bounce back from it. We would like to be able to actually sustain that optimal performance for the long term, put something in place and just keep on growing. And so reflecting on what happened in the shooting and how I managed that, how I managed it beforehand, how I managed it while I was on the ground, and then how I managed it afterwards and through my rehabilitation, and eventually got back to Star Group. I've taken part of that as a model, and it's also part of a conversation I had with a psychiatrist just 3 months after the shooting, because the basis to the shooting, shot 14 times in less than 5 seconds, lying on the ground for 3 hours before anybody could get me out. First doctor to get to me said that I was 30 seconds from death, and then I spent 28 days in hospital where you and the 36ers came to visit me, which was a great time. But everybody expected me to be in psychotherapy for decades afterwards. Not because of your visit, but
Yeah, I
because
was going to say that.
It was a friendly visit, really.
I follow that when I work with him as well too, by the way.
But everybody expected me to be in psychotherapy afterwards. But I went to see a psychiatrist, a world-renowned trauma psych, just 3 months after the shooting, and he said, "Derek, as a result of our chat today, go back to work tomorrow." Physically, I couldn't do it for another 2.5 years. But psychologically, I was ready to go back to work, and I never had to see him again.
Can we just touch on that for a
Yeah.
minute? Because we saw you walk in here. Ando, he's pretty sprightly.
Oh,
Looked like
yeah.
you just got off the bike, mate, and you're ready to go for a run. Most people would look at you and say, yeah, mentally I can see where that's tough, but 14 bullets didn't really seem to bother you too much. But there was a long period of rehab, and often with athletes and people, they falter and struggle through that period.
Yep.
Obviously, you had some difficult moments.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
What pushed you through that period to where you are now?
And you would have been at your peak as well.
Absolutely.
you would have been
Yeah.
at your peak.
Yeah,
Your Star
absolutely.
Forge, you're at your peak.
Yeah, my resting heart rate at the time was around about 38.
Wow.
So, it's reasonably fit.
Saved you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I had in my favour, that absolute fitness. But being able to control the mind and the body so that I can keep that heart rate down rather than going into panic mode as well.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to say Ando's forgetting these conversations that we were having before. I've forgotten your question.
2.5 years of rehab.
Oh, that's right.
Pushing through that pillar of going and not giving up.
Well, initially it was setting what people would describe as the small goal, but it was the most important for me. Even prior to the shooting, I'd had a discussion with my wife. I may be shot and injured, I may be shot and killed. If I don't die, anything better than death is a bonus to me, so long as I'm able to interact with my kids.
Yeah.
So my
Sorry,
first...
did she see it that way? She said, no, be dead. Insurance policies.
Yeah, that's
were-
right. Insurance
take-
policies were big.
Take
at the
one
time,
for the
but
team,
It's
Derek.
always, and also it's always going to be someone else.
Yes.
That was one of
You
the
know,
conversations we had.
Yeah.
Would she go and have some other marriage? Would she stay single? Or would she build a shrine to me and just worship every day? I know what my option was, but...
And the shrine's going really well.
But so that first focus was just to be able to get back and interact with the kids.
Yep.
Just be able to run and hop and skip and jump. My goal, my ultimate goal was always to go back to Starries.
Yep, which you did.
To Star Group, which I eventually did do. But the first goals were just to be able to run and hop and skip and jump with the kids. And as I started achieving that little one, I've gone, actually, that other big one is looking more achievable. So I set the next goal, Still always with that in mind. Never lost heart, never lost focus, because I was passionate about that. And basically that's the bottom line. If you've got something that you're passionate about, it's a real purpose for you. And part of it was a bigger purpose for what I can do for community as well, but it's about chasing that passion. That's what pushed me
Derek
through.
McManus was our special guest. Still plenty of stories to tell. Stay with it.
Hi, I'm Mark Aiston, and I'm clean and sober now for 113 days. No, actually 108 days. Don't want to get too far ahead of myself. And I'm very grateful, and I'm very pleased to be here.
I'm Derek McManus. I'm a former police officer, 42 years service, 11 years with the Police Star Group, Special Task and Rescue. In 1994, I was shot 14 times in less than 5 seconds and lying on the ground for 3 hours before they could get me out. I have a mental health journey as well.
My name's Luke McLean and I'm the founder of an organisation called I Am Worth More. I'm a lived experience facilitator, sharing my story in the hope that it can help other people seek help, but also help others improve their mental health. Now I have a question to start us all off, and I guess focusing on the harder times and the experiences, would you care to I guess, share the deepest, darkest moments that you may have had personally, and then essentially what steps you've taken to overcome that?
Yeah. My journey probably started well before the shooting ever happened. And that was, I had conversations with myself and conversations with my partner about the reality of the future that I had. I made choices to go into Starries, Star Group, Starries, and I knew there were risks of being shot and injured, maybe shot and killed. So we had that conversation. I knew it was going to happen. I prepared myself for it, physically, mentally, emotionally. But no matter how much I prepared, it still didn't address everything that I was going to face. And there were some, during my rehabilitation afterwards, there were some great highs where I was achieving things. But as much as everybody goes, oh wow, you made it back to Starries, that must be magnificent, it was a hard journey. Just like anybody dealing with any mental health or addiction or breaking a habit or trying to achieve something, there are always challenges. And for me, I remember there were times where I'd go to the gym and I'd push myself, but I didn't achieve what I wanted, and I'd come home and I'd collapse for 24 hours, not be able to do a thing, and just had to pull myself back out of bed and find that passion again and keep on chasing it.
How do you feel now?
Absolutely sensational. Life is good, things are great. Probably my darkest time though was that I didn't have any PTSD or stress or anxieties in relation to the shooting, but it was in relation to how other people had dealt with me after the shooting. So in relation to the shooting, I was cleared almost immediately, no psych problems or issues at all. 2.5 years later, I had some other issues at work. I went through a divorce. I left the family with my dog. My dog had died, so all these things were piling up. And listening to some of your conversations before, I didn't realise that I had a mental health problem. I just noticed there were changes in my life that I didn't like. I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't engaging well, I wasn't training hard. And I just thought, there's something happening in my life I don't like, but I knew I wasn't eating well, so I went to the doctor and said, tell me what nutrition I need to take to fix this. And he told me I had mild depression. And it was at that time I was going, seriously? Okay, how do we fix it? And one of the things that amazes people is that I was diagnosed with mild depression. 1 month later, I was cleared and went back to work full time. So I caught it very, very early. I was very, very lucky, but I also dealt with it very proactively. And that's what I talk about now. It's about human durability. It's about going beyond resilience. It's about having those conversations about what could be expected, having a plan in place that if it does happen, this is how I'm going to manage it. And that's when the doctor diagnosed me with depression. I've just gone, excellent, what do we do about it? And did everything he wanted me to do. 1 month later, cleared and went back to work and still feeling good.
So you took responsibility? Yeah.
Absolutely, a step. But I took responsibility before it happened.
Yep.
I had that conversation. This is a reality. It could happen to me. And the same for people with addictions. It's always there. The more we're willing to acknowledge it and say, oh, it could happen. If it does happen, I'm going to take some proactive steps, rather than sometimes we try and figure that, oh, we're tough, but it's not going to affect us. I can do it for a little while and it won't drag me down, and then just slowly it implodes. I was very, very lucky that I was proactive right from the very beginning, but that's kind of been a theme for my life as well. But the model of durability that I work with is something that other people can use as a model as well.
Look, when did you take responsibility for your gambling issues? Can you remember the moment that you realised that things were getting out of control?
I knew things were out of control a long time before I took responsibility. It was probably the understanding of what had happened to lead me to want to gamble. For a long time, my addiction, I thought, was purely around just chasing the dollar. And chasing the money, and I thought it was that I had values that were so heavily focused around making money and all this sort of stuff. As soon as I started to realise that addiction is essentially caused from trauma, and for a lot of people it's very difficult to be able to understand what the trauma is that's led you to that activity or to that substance or to whatever it may be. But for me, it was being able to understand the behavioural pattern of when I was gambling, and when I was gambling was because I had high stress or I had things going on in my life that I needed to shut off from. So it wasn't really the fascination of chasing the money, it was really, that was my way to completely consume myself so that I was just zoned into gambling, what's on next, what can I bet on? Because when I started to realise that it didn't actually bother me whether I won or lost, it was just the consumption of my energy on that one thing that it blocked everything else out.
Completely distracted from
Absolutely.
stress. A quick inquiry, you said it's a result of trauma. We're talking about physical trauma or mental, emotional trauma as well?
Well, I think it can be both. For me, it's been a long journey and a lot of personal development to go back to essentially the root, which I'm still not at the root with my with the therapy that I go through, but it's being able to understand a lot of my behavioural patterns. So initially I thought that I just had addiction, and I thought the addiction was causing a lot of my depression and my anxiety, because I thought my anxiety was caused just from the worry of not having money. But what I was able to understand is that I had a lot of behaviours that, because I had disconnected and isolated myself from other people, I wasn't around people for them to notice those behaviours.
Yep.
So I would quickly, my ego would get in control and convince myself, oh no, we'll be all right, we can do this, we can get over it. So therefore I didn't notice a lot of those behaviours. So once I was more so in a committed relationship, I was then able to be able to notice a lot more of these. And then I would start noticing that I would start getting frustrated when I couldn't control certain emotions, that it then got me back into a doctor to talk about that and start to look at things like borderline personality disorders and bipolar and these types of illnesses, which I'm able to manage. And then therefore my depressive states and my depressive moods, I'm therefore able to manage and come out of that state and out of that mood a lot quicker than what I previously used to.
See, it's interesting that you say that you still aren't sure of the root yet.
Yeah.
I started gambling and using drugs at the age of 14, which is 46, 47 years ago. And at the time, if you guys had said to me, Mark, I think this is going to end up, in a pretty bad place for you, I would have looked at you and thought, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I love this. This is my life. I live for those three things.
Yeah.
I live for them, and it was all consuming. But even now, 46 years, 47 years on, I still really don't know what caused the addiction.
started.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure it was an addiction right at the start, but certainly 12 months later it became an addiction. I can look at that now and say it was an addiction. At the time, I didn't feel that way. I just enjoyed it, but I couldn't stop. So if you had said to me, Mark, just stop for a week, I wouldn't have been able to have done that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you say that you still don't understand what that root is. I'm not sure what's going to happen when you do find it. Are you optimistic that when you do find that root, then things will change even more?
Well, I think one point for me is knowing that if I'm connected to other things, I therefore don't require that fulfillment from zoning out. But that's about being accountable and also managing a lot of my, managing my workload, managing my relationships, managing my mental, physical health, and all of those aspects in complete balance. And knowing that if I pull away from one, others can start to fall away.
Yep.
So I think even if I don't discover the root of those certain behaviours and the addiction and that type of thing, I think as long as I'm connected and fulfilled in other areas, I therefore don't require that activity. I was going to come back to a point with you though, in particular with gambling, because I think if you sort of asked the question back when you first started, it was, even if you asked, how often are you gambling? And we kind of associate a problem gambling that might be every day or whatever it may be. You may recognise it, but you still may not recognise that that's a problem. Was that the case for you?
Absolutely. No doubt about that. But now, thinking back, I understand because up until 4 months ago, I was still gambling and I was gambling a lot of money. But I wasn't at the pub all day, but I was still gambling. I had that, that extraordinary feeling when I walked into the hotel, the endorphins started to really release in the head, and I hadn't even had a bet. Excuse me. But so I'd get that rush, and then of course you get a different rush when you had a bet. You'd get a different rush when you won. You'd get a different rush when you lost. But I guess the end of my gambling story is pretty horrible, and that is that I asked my sister for $100 for petrol, and of course I was lying to her. I spent $20 on the petrol, and then $20 on gambling, and then did something, and then went to the pub again. Got down to my last 20, which doesn't sound a lot of money, but nonetheless it's the process that's important. And I was at the Arca bar, and I'll never forget it. I went in, I had $10 each way on something, and it lost. And I was in such a state. I was so overwhelmed with guilt, and I was so out of it, and I was so down and so much in that hole. I walked outside and I was physically sick alongside the car.
Yeah, right.
That's a long way from how I felt about gambling 46 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say $100 isn't a lot of money, but it's the process. It doesn't matter the amount.
No, it doesn't.
It's actually the behaviour, the habit.
Process,
and there's a book that I'd like to refer back to in a moment, but when you realise that you need to break that habit, break that addiction, did you find there were times where you were really, really strong, but then you fell off the path, and what happened at that point?
Absolutely, and I think the whole thing about, and we've had this discussion personally before between Mark and I, but a discussion about whether you convince yourself that you're an addict and that you should never partake in that activity or whatever again, or whether you try and reprogram the brain to almost not think about it and think about other things. For me personally, when I used to have a relapse and when I used to go back to gambling, I used to beat myself up so much because of it. Whereas if it was a normal person without an addiction going in and having a bet, and then not having a bet for another 12 months, for them it's not an issue. But for an addict, if you relapse, you almost convince yourself that you're a complete failure, that you're never going to be clean again, and all of this. So it's almost being able to understand that if you have a lapse, it's okay, understand why it's happened, and then be able to go back to trying to manage daily again as to not doing it. But
That's a great description of what I was trying to get at. I wish I could remember the author of the book, but the book is called The Four Agreements, and it's a way to live life.
Yeah.
The fourth agreement is be kind to yourself. If you are trying to achieve something and you fall off the path,
Absolutely.
it's not destroyed. It's just you've got a moment, acknowledge it, get back on the path and keep on going.
That's great advice, Derek.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and The Four Agreements is a great book.
We're too hard on ourselves.
Absolutely,
Yeah, we're
always.
too hard on ourselves. I mean, the little voice on the shoulder not only sends us into a dark place, it also makes sure that when we go into that dark place, we feel shame, and we do too much of that. We do too much self-talk in a negative way. We've got a couple of minutes, but just very quickly, I wanted to sort of ask both of you this. So if you feel as though you're heading down the wrong path again, even if it's just a feeling, what do you do?
So the model that I use for human durability has several stages in it. One of the stages is to identify the signs that tell you are going well or you are going badly. And then the next part is plan for those things. And if those things happen, react immediately. Now, one of the things that happens is sometimes we'll plan something and we'll say, this is the path I'm going to take. And something happens, we go, I don't have a plan for that, so I'm just going to keep on going. And when it falls over, you say to yourself, if only I'd done something back then. But we didn't know it was an indicator. So if I see the indicator that tells me I'm going off track, I go, okay, I've got to do something at that time and respond early rather than just saying, I think I can handle it. No, respond early and take some positive action.
In 60 seconds?
Brilliant. I think that's a much better way than I would explain it, but really being able to be vulnerable in showing your flaws or showing those signs that you're heading down the wrong path so you can understand and get educated on it. Because a lot of people won't have those strategies to work with unless you actually show vulnerability and putting your hand up and saying, hey, I need a bit of help. So I think spot on.
Well, from my point of view, both of those indicators, both of those strategies, and also too, I take notice now of what people are saying around me. Luke.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, mate.
Always pleasure.
Always good to see you.
Mark, always good.
Good to see
Thanks,
you well,
Derek.
Good to see
Nice
you
to meet
well.
you,
You
Luke.
look as though you could play in a forward pocket for the Crows. It's been
If they pay the right wage.
It's been a great discussion. It's been so important, and I think we need to continue to talk about mental health and addiction, and not just us three, but everyone out in the community.
If I can just pick up on that, let's talk about mental health. I talk about mental fitness, mental agility, mental strength, right? That's what we need. Okay, sometimes we get touchy about mental health. No, let's talk about fitness. Let's talk about agility.
Perfect.
Let's talk about strength.
Okay. Keep mentally well, folks. We hope you enjoyed the chat.
And welcome to Before the Bounce. Joining us tonight is the Executive Director of the Breakthrough Mental Health Research Foundation, John Mannion. John, thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks very much, Matt. I think we'll just call it breakthrough. It makes it easier for everybody.
Bit of a tongue twister.
You've
Ando, good to have
been in
you.
it for a long time. I mean, we're 40 years, and now heading that department. It's changed obviously so much.
Yeah, the mental health story's changed immense. So not quite 40 years, because obviously I'm still a young boy, but yeah, I'm into my 32nd year in the mental health world.
Yeah.
And when I first started to actually have a conversation about mental health in the community, it was a non-existent conversation. You know, if we look at the history of mental health, we still had large hospitals. We sort of had them on the end of cities. We did, and mental health was deemed as a bit of a weakness and a weak conversation. Where we now look at the conversation we're having now. We're having conversations in every sporting arena where people are actually saying, I'm struggling with this, and that's incredible.
So is that a growing rate?
Well, I think it's a growing rate in that people are now feeling comfortable to have the conversation, and I think that in itself is the most powerful thing.
But it's been like so frightening and alarming. I've lost a very close friend. You hear someone like a Scott Hodges, who's big and powerful in the football world, and he's had issues, and you hear so much of it, and yet 20 years ago. You didn't hear not so much. So I'm just, the world's changing, the pressures are changing.
I think pressures are definitely changing.
Yeah.
I think that the ability to start to have the conversation, to talk about it, and it not to be seen as a weakness, but actually to be seen as a strength. For someone to actually start to talk about the challenges they're facing with their mental health problems, that takes an enormous amount of strength to actually do that. To actually open up to somebody to say, I need help. That is enormous. What we now need to do is make sure we're actually listening to what's being said to us, and then start to look at how do we do something about that. So how do we help people? How do we look at new plans, new education, new training programs?
It's fantastic, John. Something that's mental health. You said it. It's so big now. Something very close to myself as well. Being at that age and around a footy club where a lot of people are struggling. Our footy club alone this year, we've had a few put the hand up and say, which is fantastic, because you probably wouldn't have seen that in years prior. So it's fantastic that they've put their hand up.
I just want to, but was there a reason for it years ago? I mean, that's all I just don't understand. I mean, was 30 years, would have players put their hands up and people in the community put their hands up and said, I think I've got a mental issue? Is a society changed that much?
I think society has changed that much.
That much that I need to put my hand up because I'm really struggling with life.
Yeah, because I think that if you look at the statistics for suicide, we're now getting more reported suicides.
Yeah.
But how many were actually occurring that weren't reported because we weren't talking about it? We didn't measure it in the same way. We didn't have the conversation. We didn't really dig down into it, and especially we didn't research into it. So the drive and the change now is actually changing that whole conversation, and actually it's for the better.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
No, and Breakthrough, give us what Breakthrough's a fantastic part of it. Partnering with the SNFL and community footy as well. And over the last few weeks, or few months especially, you've really been out there and driving the conversation.
With the SANFL and the community teams, we had the Breakthrough Mental Health round, which was all about raising the profile of mental health, breaking down the stigma, discrimination. Clubs were then looking at how they could actually generate funds and investments for us to put back into the clubs. So we had 80 clubs taking part of this across the whole state. This weekend we were all part of the country championships, and we had all the teams taking part in that, and the money we're actually generated from that we're returning to the football clubs. So we're going to be rolling out the mental health first aid training program, which is actually mental health literacy. It's about empowering clubs to help their members, and it's not just about the club, it's about their local community. So over the next 12 months with SANFL, we'll be rolling that training out, and then we're going to evaluate the impact that actually has on the community.
The training's so vital. I would not to say if a friend came to me and say, you know what, I've got mental health issues, Greg, I need to chat with you. I wouldn't know what to do. You know what I mean? Like,
very, very simple.
Wow.
The first thing is you say to him, thanks for saying that to me, and then you just listen. And that's the first point. So if we start to have the listening conversation, then we can build up the skills from there.
And go and see organisations like yours to really take to that next step.
And by having 2 champions in every club, then they'll be the people to go to have that conversation with first.
Wow.
No, John, it's fantastic. Before we let you go, we only got a short time here, but How can people get in contact with Breakthrough?
Yeah, if you go onto our website, which is the breakthroughfoundation.org.au, there's a whole list of the programs we actually do, and there's a whole range of different ways in which you can fundraise. So if anyone wants to come and join us on the City to Bay run and fundraise for Breakthrough, you can walk with me or you can run with the more younger team members. So thanks very much.
Fantastic.
John,
guys.
thank you very much
Yeah,
for coming
brilliant.
on. John Mannion from Breakthrough Foundation. And it's been fantastic to have a chat to you, mate.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, what a powerful education lesson that was, and an insight into mental health. Please, if you're out there and you think you're battling with any issues of your own or know someone that is, don't hesitate to call someone. Breakthrough is one of many fantastic foundations out there. So make sure you just do whatever you can to help a person in need as well. It's obviously a big issue in today's society. So make sure you get the help that you need. And with that as well, we thank all of our sponsors for tonight's show. Rachel Laurie at Ray White, North Adelaide, a fantastic support. Modern Trailers Paraka, the Exchange Hotel in Gawler, D-Fibs R Us, My Foot Doctor, the Prince Albert Hotel out there in Gawler, Battery World, Dave Benson Caravans, Rewards International, and of course Flight Centre as well. So all fantastic supporters of us here at Piranha Media. We'll see you next week. Remember, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to the magazine. There's lots of fantastic content out there at the moment, and there's only going to be plenty more to come. So join us at Before the Bounce and Piranha Media.